Well, hello and welcome to another webinar by XTM International. Today we're going to talk about XTM Cloud user management. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Iñaki Hernandez Laza, and I'm a member of the experts team at XTM. Before we start, I would like to mention a few housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive the recording afterwards, and you will also be able to access it in the future through XTM's on-demand platform. If you haven't done so yet, may I recommend that you visit our website and register to access XTM's webinars. This will give you free access to past webinars on many different subject matters. All participants are muted by default, and if you ask to ask a question, please do so via the chat panel, and I will try and answer questions at the end of the session if time allows. So let's start today. Today's topic is XTM's Cloud User Management. So today we're going to talk about user roles and access rights. We're going to see how to create different users, give them different potential roles, different access rights to different capabilities in the system. We're also going to see how to create user groups and language service providers users as well, like LSP. And last but not least, we're also going to see how to add users and search for different functionalities. So let me go into the actual platform itself, XTM Cloud, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And suffice to say that XTM Cloud is based on authentication protocols and access rights. So that means that you as an administrator, as a user, as a client, have complete capability and flexibility to give access rights to different users, and you control what they see within the system and what functions and what workflow steps they can act on. Okay, you have complete control of that. As you can see here now, I am logged in as an administrator. An administrator means that I have a lot of functionality in the system. As you can see, I can create projects, I can see the customers that I have in my system, I can create users, I can translate if I wish to, I can use concordant searches in translation memories. I can go to translation memory module where I can manage my TMs, import TMs, export TMs, and align sets of files, source and target in order to create translation memories. I can work on terminology, etc., etc. I have all the functionality possible. Before we start, it's important to highlight that only admins can create other admins. In other words, a project manager cannot create an admin role. A linguist cannot create an admin role. Only administrators can create administrators themselves, okay? Another thing I want to show you before we start is that under configuration, user details, you can select the language of your preference. Let's say if you are a German speaker, for instance, joining us today, you can see how we can go into XTM and you have all the functionality in German. Now, we support other languages, as you can see here in the system. I'm going to put it back into English, if you don't mind. So as we put it into English, we go back here and you will see how under configuration, user details, we have capabilities in simplified Chinese, French, Canadian, German, Japanese, Polish, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, and Turkish. So you can feel free to work at your own language if you wish. Okay, let's go to the users tab because today is all talking about users, how to create users, what access rights we want to give them as well. So we go to the users. First of all, let me add a user without any predisposed, anything defined. So I can select whether it is a Mr., Mrs., Miss, Doctor. It's not really a mandatory field, as you can see. It doesn't have an asterisk here, which means it's not a mandatory field. So let's create a user called Iñaki Demo. I'm just going to call it like that. And my surname is June Webinar. I'm just making this up, as you can see. Now, for instance, I want to be a linguist. I'm going to be a linguist. And as part of being a linguist, I'm going to be able to translate, obviously. But maybe the customer, the client, my own company wants me to also correct the job of other linguists and perhaps review as well the job of other linguists. Now, there is a differentiation in XTM between review and correct. Review, you can make comments on a segment translation, but you cannot correct it. Whereas corrected, you can actually change the target and also put a comment, okay? Now, my username, I'm gonna call it the same as this, Iñaki Demo. My password, I'm gonna put a password here. And an important thing to highlight is that when you create a password and the user logs in, the user will be asked to change that password on the first time, okay? I'm gonna put my email and my currency into euro. And again, if you select send account creation email, this user will receive an email saying an account has been created for you as a linguist. Click on this link to access. This is your username and your password. Okay, in this case, I'm not going to do it because I know the password that I set myself. Okay, I do this, I create a user, and now I'm going to log in as that particular user, which was Iñaki Demo. And this is my password. If I remember correctly, there you are. And that is my password. And as I said, I have my old password and it's asking me to introduce a new one of my preference. Now, as an administrator, you can also determine that you don't want people to be able to change their passwords. So if you don't want users to be able to change their passwords, you can also control that as an administrator. But in this case, obviously I have changes. And you can see that as a linguist, I only have tasks. I'm not going to be translating things. There's a few projects, maybe there's nothing here for me at the moment. I just created the account, but I will only be able to translate. Okay, so that determines the amount of menu items that you have here on the top frame. Let me log out of here and let me go back to the administrator role. Oops, excuse me. Now you can see under the users tab how I have a number of people created here. I have Grant, I have Joe Blocks, I have Linguist One, reviewers, etc., etc. The one that we just created here now, etc. But we also have a number of roles here: a PM creator, PM projects, terminologies, DM expert, etc. Let me show you the differentiation between those. Okay, a PM is somebody who will be able to create jobs, obviously, create projects, assign resources, define workflow steps, etc., etc. Let's go to the PM role in here, and you will see how I have created all of these before today's demo, so I can just quickly go and show you the differentiations. So you can see project capabilities, they can see who the customers are in the system, they can use, or they can see who the users are, and they can add users. A PM can add users, okay? Now, if you have a number of users that is not very high, you can do it manually, like we just did a few minutes ago. However, if you have hundreds and hundreds of users to enter into the system, we have an import file that you can use in order to do it more effectively. So this import file will be then showing you the job title for the person in question, the role, the workflow steps that they're going to work on, the username you give them, the nickname, the password, etc. So you can fill in this information, and if you have, let's say, 300 users, rather than doing it manually, it's much more time consuming, it's much faster and less time consuming to do it in this way, and then going into the system in here, going into the import functionality, you import the file, and all those users will be created automatically. Okay, so the PM role, as I say, has all this functionality. as we see. Let me go into two different PM roles. One of them is called PM Creator. Excuse me. PM Creator. And these are limited access rights for a project manager. This person can create a project, obviously, but notice how they cannot see the customers within the system. They have the most limited functionality for a PM, which is basically creating a project. Okay. If we go to the other limited, restricted type of project manager, it's called PM Projects. And again, these naming conventions are completely up to you what you call them. What important is the access rights that you give them and the workflow steps. You can call them whatever you wish to call them, right? Again, this person now can have projects, but can also see the customers that are in the system, okay? Let's move quickly into terminologies role. And again, I have created a role. And I'm going to explain a bit this in more detail in a few minutes, but I want you to visualize that this is a role for somebody who's going to be working in terminology in your company, whether you are a member of an LSP or whether you are a client company. You have a user here who is going to be working on terminology exclusively. They're not going to be able to translate. They're not going to be able to modify segments. They're not going to be able to correct or review. They're not going to be able to do TM search concordances, nothing. This person exclusively works in terminology. They create a term base, as you can see here, with definition, concept level orientation model, term level orientation model. They can import terminology from different sources, from TBX, from Excel, applying concept-oriented metadata or term-oriented metadata. They can export that as well if they want to. They can export into Excel, TBX, etc., specifying whether they want to export all the fields or specific fields in the system. That is completely up to you and is very granular, and you determine the capabilities of that user. But this is a typical case where the terminology just does that, nothing else but terminology. Then we can have a TM expert role, for instance. And again, a TM expert, as the name indicates, oops, let me put that in lowercase. A TM expert is somebody who is going to have functionality about translation memories. And here you can see how this person can go here and say, I want to select test customer as a customer and my US into Spanish TM, and have some terms in there and some segments, and they can change the status, and they can, for instance, do searches, and they can search for in the source for the term camera, perhaps. And there you go. You have the term camera in multiple segments, source, targets, etc. You can also do, for instance, the specific creation dates. Show me term camera from, let's say, February the 1st until today, etc., etc., etc. So you can work on these parameters. The TM expert role in this particular case can also import translation memories. So let's say you have a TMX file or an Excel file, source and target, and you can say, I want to export this TMX file into this particular customer. I want to give it a name called import. I select my source language. Let's assume it's English. It's not always English, but let's assume it's English into German. For instance, German, Germany. I can import those as approved. I would select my file and I would import it. No problem. This role, the TM expert role, can also export the translation memories contained within the system. So they can say, I want to export this TM for test customer from US English into all projects into Spanish, and then I can export it into TMX or Excel if I want to, or single language Excel as well. Okay, so again, this person have this capability to do these functions. The alignment module allows you to create a translation memory from a set of source and target files. Let's say you have 10 files in English, the corresponding 10 files in German, but you do not have a translation memory. Very simply, you can do an alignment here and say align as a name. My source is going to be English. Let's say English US, and my target is going to be German. And I can say I choose my files. I put them in a zip file called english.zip. My target is called german.zip. I align, and XTM Cloud will align those files for you and create a translation memory. So these are all the capabilities that a TM expert can execute in the system. Okay, let's go back for a minute to the administrator and to see the full capabilities that this person has. I put the wrong password. Apologies. There you go. So you can see how the users here, the access rights are predetermining here. The roles, what workflow steps they can take, and what language combinations they have. So for instance, I can say Joe Blocks has rights as linguist, projects and customer, TM expert, terminologist. As workflow steps, Joe Blocks is allowed to correct, translate, review, do language quality assessment, etc. Again, what happens with the language combinations? Joe Blocks does from English UA, English UK, and English US into French, German, Italian, Spanish, all of these language combinations. What access rights does Joe Blocks have? He has access to all the customers, but for instance, I can decide and say, I just want to give him access to those 4 clients and no more, because I only want this person to allow access to those. That is no problem. Do I want to give him access to language quality assessment results as an evaluee, or if he will perform as an evaluator, I can do that. Show him simple reports or extend the reports, no problem. Again, for concordance, I can give him full access or use global settings. And again, for terminology and for translation memory, I can say Joe Blocks is going to be able to view, is going to be able to suggest, but he's not going to be able to add terminology or to import or to export or to delete. That I leave to the terminologies person that I showed you before. And for instance, for translation memory, I don't want Joe Blocks to do everything. Maybe I just want Joe Blocks to be able, oops, let's move this to the left. I just want him to view and perhaps modify, but I don't want him to delete or export a translation memory. Okay, so this is how you control the different access rights of the users. Let me show you another capability, which is, I'm going to leave that unsaved, the user groups. User groups, like the name specify, is a group whereby you have a number of people who are able to do certain actions. So let's create a user group. Let's say we're going to create a user group for German translators. And they're going to translate. They're going to be able to review between themselves, and they're going to be able to correct as well. Okay, let's do that. So that is now set up as a group. The next thing we have to do is who is part of that group. So we go to users, and I'm going to add users to the German translators group. I'm going to put this linguist, this second linguist, maybe a reviewer as well, and maybe Joe Blocks as well. Okay, so I can determine that those people are now part of this group. Again, what languages are they going to be working on? I need to specify that they're going to work, let's say, for the sake of argument, from English US into German Germany. Okay, And for instance, what access rights do we want to give them to? Do we want to work on all the systems, all the clients, all the customers in the system? Perhaps not. Maybe I say I want to give them access to global soft, documentation, legal, marketing, and software for a customer called global soft. That's fine. That's perfect. Okay, so we have that information there. One of the important things about the user groups is this functionality come here that is here says first come, first served or allocation order. First come, first served means that, let's say a project manager starts a project that goes for translation, and a translator accepts that job and takes it on board and does it. Okay, let's assume that I want a specific translator to specifically translate one type of content. I can say allocation order, save here. I go to my users and I say, you know what? My best translator in German for marketing is Joe Bloggs. I want to move him up the scale and put him first. Okay. And the second best person for marketing for German is this guy, IHR reviewer. And then this person, and then that person. So you can control at all stages where the workflow steps are being directed to. When you initiate a project, the first person will be going to Joe Bloggs, or the first person will go to be Joe Bloggs. If Joe Bloggs accepts it, that's fine. If not, it will go to the second person. If not, to the third, etc., etc. So you can control at all stages that functionality, which is quite nice to have. Also, within the users, you can control the login history. So remember all these functions that we have done now. Iñaki has logged in. I'm logged in as Iñaki now, as here as admin. But before that, a few minutes ago, we logged in and out as TM experts. We logged in and out as terminologists, as PM projects, PM creator, etc., etc., and specifying the dates as well and the time. So you have control as to who is doing what in the system. Let's move into the LSPs for a moment. Let's say you have an instance of XTM Cloud as a company, as an enterprise, and you want to use a large LSP to translate your projects. Okay, you can see how a connection has been established here. You can see a green dot in there. And basically, you can see how you have general information. The company name is large LSP. The first name is large. The last name is LSP. The email is my one in this case. Typically, LSPs would have an alias that is directed to many people as opposed to just one. So you could have client name at lspname.com, something like that. Okay. The second thing you have to establish is a connection between this instance and the LSP instance. So this information will be provided to you, and you send an email to the LSP. The LSP will receive that information, they will insert it here, and then you will get from the LSP this connection information that you will establish here in order to create that two-way communication system. Now, let's say that you always send tasks to the LSP. Sometimes, although not very often, the LSP can send you tasks as well to do. So in that case, you can say, we receive tasks from the LSP as well, but that is not the common thing to do. Imagine that the LSP does not have an instance of XTM. You can lend them your licenses. You can say, I'm going to give this LSP 5 of my licenses. And remember that those are concurrent login licenses. You can have 10 people, only 5 can access at the same time. Okay, so these are concurrent seats. So if you have an LSP or somebody who doesn't have XTM Cloud, you can lend them licenses as you wish. Of course, the LSP must be established as well in terms of the languages combination. In this case, this LSP is going to work from US English into French, German, Italian, and Spanish. Again, the access rights to all customers, or I can determine and give them access to only 4, for instance. Do I want them to see the language quality assessment reports? Yes or no? Do I want to give them certain access rights to terminology and translation memory? Yes or no? For instance, I want my LSP to be able to add terminology, view terminology, but I don't want them to export or import or delete. Likewise, with the translation memory, I can say for selected customers only, and I want them to perhaps have restricted access rights. I want them to view, I want them to modify perhaps, but I don't want them to delete or export or align. Okay, so I can control this. As LSPs and users work in the system, they will be rated as well in a number of things, a number of capacities, on quality and on punctuality. On quality means that if somebody does a language quality assessment and the LSP always has a very, very high threshold of quality, it will be indicated here. This LSP for these languages is always consistently achieving a quality of 95% and higher. When it comes to punctuality, it will say they always deliver on time or they deliver late. That will give you an indication as to what resources you want to use based on the quality they give you and the punctuality they give you. And of course, when it comes to an LSP or a user as well, you may want to have rate cards. Okay, the rate cards obviously are specifications as to the different prices that they charge you for fuzzy matches, repetitions, no matching, ice matches, etc., for the different workflow steps, for transcreation, for translation, for correction, for review, for language quality assessment, etc. Okay, so you have all this information here. Now, one of the things I want to show you as well is templates. And if you go to a project, we have a template here, for instance, called demo template. And this demo template has project details and is specifying that it goes from US English into Spanish and Italian, okay? And for instance, it's also telling me that there are different workflow steps depending on the language. For Spanish, we have translate, correct, language quality assessment, and approve TM. Whereas for Italian, we also have, or we only have 2 steps, translate and correct, okay? Now, this is important because in the template, you can also specify who your translator is going to be by default. It's going to be Joe Blocks out of this list. Who is going to be my corrector, my reviewer for Italian? This guy, IHR reviewer. For Spanish, we have 3 steps, translate, correct, and LQA. So my translation is going to be done by IHR linguist. My correction is going to be done by IHR reviewer, and my language quality assessment is going to be done by IHR reviewer too. Now, this is important because when we create a project, look what happens. I'm going to add a project to the system whereby I say I want to go into test customer. I want to say webinar 2022 June. I want to select a template called demo template. And look how this has already pre-populated these things for me. I'm not going to do any pre-processing, but it has pre-populated that Italian and Spanish are the target languages, that US English is the source language. I'm going to add a file that needs to be translated. And then it tells me as well that there are different workflow steps depending on the language combination. So for Spanish, we have translate, correct, language quality assessment, and approve TM. Whereas for Italian, we only have 2 steps, translate and correct. So I'm going to start this project and initiate this project. And when this project is finalized and analyzed, I'm going to refresh that. We will see how in here we have the specifications, but in the workflow, these users have been pre-populated, and this pre-population is coming from the template. In other words, we had assigned Joe Blocks to translate for Italian. We had assigned that the correction in Italian was going to be done by IHR reviewer, And for Spanish, we had determined that translation was going to be done by IHL linguist, and then correction was going to be done by IHL reviewer, and language quality assessment by IHL reviewer too. Okay, so this is important, and this is configured at the template level in here, where you can, of course, create new templates and do everything like that. Okay. I don't know if we have any questions. PM Creator can basically create projects, but what is exactly the difference between full and limited PM, user creation, anything else? So basically, yeah, workflow step definition. Herman, thank you very much for your question. The full PM role obviously can have definition of users, definition of access rights, definition of workflow steps, and typically, and sometimes PMs also have different access rights in order to perhaps do concordant searches in TMs. Whereas, as we saw before, let me close this question now. As we saw before, if I log out of here, there you go. If I go here as the, let's say, PM creator that we saw, this person pretty much can add a project, okay? But they don't even see what customers you have in the system. They don't see anything, very, very basic functionality. They can, of course, configure the username and passwords, etc. Now, this is the PM creator. The PM projects, as we saw before, the PM projects with an S, this user can also see what customers are involved in the system, okay? Now, as you can see here, these people cannot create users either. But if I go to the PM role, in other words, the full PM role, let's call it, to be clear, if I go to the PM role, this person has users, and this person can add users to the system, okay? Now, remember what we said before, a PM cannot use an administrator. They cannot. You can see here, there's no administrator role to be created by a PM. A PM cannot do that. However, if I go to my administrator role, you can see how an administrator will be able to add a user with an administrator role, okay? So those are the differentiations. The PM, full PM role can create users, not admins, but the other roles, yes. The PM creator and projects have limited functionality. One will not even see the customers, the other one will. Does that clarify, Herman? I hope it does. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions, or are we more or less clear about? Allow me to do an analogy. I always say that whenever you cook a meal, you must have the ingredients together. And this is similar. When you create a project, you must have the ingredients together. The ingredients are: who is the customer, who is the user or users, or user groups, or language service provider. What access rights are you going to give each of the users, and which language combinations each of those users is going to have, and then what workflow steps are they going to have? In other words, the linguist is only going to translate, the reviewer is going to do correction and review perhaps, etc., etc. So once you have those ingredients together is when you start creating your project templates, and then you start specifying Germán is my translator for Spanish, and Joe Blocks is my corrector, etc., etc. For what languages? Germán for Spanish and German, and etc., etc., etc. So you have to predefine and have in your clear mind what access rights you're going to give different people and what capabilities they can do. Do you want somebody like Germán to go and do concordant searches here? No problem. Then he'll have access to do broad matches, trace match, exact matches at source and target level with language variants, etc. Can they work on terminology? Yes, then they'll be able to do all kinds of functionalities in terminology. Can they work in translation memory to import, to export, to align, etc.? So all that functionality is predetermined that you as a PM or as an administrator give the specific access rights to the specific people and what workflow steps you want them to execute. Okay? Are there any other more questions for today? No? Okay, well, thank you very much. So, therefore, this concludes today's webinar.